He's a race-baiting, xenophobic, religious bigot. He doesn't represent my party. He doesn't represent the values that the men and women who wear the uniform are fighting for.
Hello, and welcome to the podcast. I am your host, Pastor Frank E. Leggett III. Now, there are millions of Americans who possess very strong feelings about Donald Trump, and rightly so. He's been called an inveterate liar, an adjudicated sex offender, a malignant, narcissistic, sociopathic psychopath. Boy, that's a mouthful. He's been called a misogynist because he hates and disrespects women, especially African-American women. He's been called a xenophobe because he hates anyone who's not a white American. Most recently, at the Democratic National Convention, Michelle Obama said he froze in the face of the pandemic that killed over 1 million Americans. And the implication that she was making is that he is a horrible leader who failed America when strong, decisive leadership was needed the most. And let me add that there are those who are convinced that notwithstanding his pronouncements of being a genius, that he actually has a very low IQ. Where's the proof of that? Here it is. Those in his administration have divulged that he could not read the PDB. PDB stands for the President's Daily Brief. Now, the PDB is a daily detailed summary of some of the most sensitive information about our nation's national security issues prepared by the various intelligence agencies across the U.S. I'm told that his team had to dumb it down and to share it with him verbally because he could not read and comprehend what he was reading. So they had to do a very, 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 very simplistic version for him because he really is not that smart. Plus, there's another way to prove that he has an incredibly low IQ. Donald Trump has threatened to sue anyone who publishes his grades from the Wharton School of Business that he brags about matriculating at and graduating from. And it is a very prestigious University of Pennsylvania, which the Wharton School of Business is a part of, is a very prestigious Ivy League school. But he has threatened to sue anyone who publishes his grades. Why? You see, no one that is confident about their grades does that. Nobody. No one that is proud of their academic achievements goes to the lengths to prevent the public from seeing those grades unless they are hiding something. Unless he was not this stable genius that he declares himself to be, unless he was a very poor student. And the fact of the matter is this. Donald Trump is a moral and an intellectual midget masquerading as a genius. He's a failed businessman. His casinos went bankrupt. His airline went bankrupt. His foundation went bankrupt because he was defrauding people. Trump Org defrauded the government for decades and was just found liable for fraud and now has to pay $500 million as a result of his fraud. Earlier this year, he was found guilty of 34 felony counts of fraud by a jury of his peers, excuse me, in New York. He's being investigated right now for accepting a $10 million bribe from Egyptian President El-Sisi immediately prior to the 2016 election. That probe is just heating up, and that is a violation on so many levels of accepting bribe money from a foreign entity. That violates everything that our election process is about. There are those who are convinced that Donald Trump is the worst con man that America has ever seen. That's who he is. That's what he does. He cons people. There are Republicans like Anthony Scaramucci who declares that behind closed doors, Republicans hate Donald Trump. So I want you to take a look at several videos from 2016 of what individuals said about him when he was making his first run to the presidency. Let's take a look at what Lindsey Graham said in 2016 about Trump. Check out this video.
Hearing what Donald Trump says.
Disgusted. Well, I want to talk to the Trump supporters for a minute. I don't know who you are, and I don't know why you like this guy. I think what you like about him, he appears to be strong when the rest of us are weak. He's a very successful businessman, and he's going to make everything great. He's going to take all the problems of the world and put them in a box and make your life better. That's what he's selling. Here's what you're buying. He's a race-baiting, xenophobic, religious bigot. He doesn't represent my party. He doesn't represent the values that the men and women who wear the uniform are fighting for.
He's a race-baiting, xenophobic bigot, said Senator Lindsey Graham from South Carolina about March 2016. Now, I want you to take a look at what Graham also said in 2016, how Trump would impact the Republican Party if he won the nomination in November of 2016. Take a look at this video.
Trump cares to banner my party. I think it taints conservatism for generations to come. I think his campaign is opportunistic, race-baiting, religious bigotry, xenophobia. Other than that, he'd be a good nominee.
That he would, if he won, he would taint the party, is what he said. And that is exactly what has happened to the Republican Party. On top of that, he has a foul and vulgar mouth when it suits him, even in a church setting. And worse than his political failures in and out of office, he comes across as just a horrible human being that none of the people who vote for him would want their sons to grow up to be like him. None of them. So the question is this: should Christians vote for a man who is as dangerous and as flawed as Donald Trump? But before we answer that question, there's yet another question that Christians need to answer, which is, should Christians vote? That question has been raised forever, with individuals on both sides of that proverbial fence, some for and some against. As a Seventh-day Adventist Christian, I can tell you that that question has come up every election cycle in my denomination. Consider this quote from my favorite modern day author. Here is what she says. The Lord would have his people bury political questions. On these themes, silence is eloquence. Christ calls upon his followers to come into unity on the pure gospel principles which are plainly revealed in the Word of God. We cannot with safety vote for political parties, for we do not know whom we are voting for. We cannot with safety take part in any political scheme. Now, take a look at this next quote that she says. There is a large vineyard to be cultivated, but while Christians are to work among unbelievers, they are not to appear like worldlings. They are not to spend their time talking politics or acting politics, for by so doing, they give the enemy opportunity to come in and cause variance and discord. Both of these quotes come from the book Counsels for the Church. Page 316, paragraph 2 was the previous quote, and this one is page 316, paragraph 5. Now, because of quotes like these, many Adventists are of the opinion that they should not vote. Moreover, these Adventists try to convince other Adventists that they should not vote either. Well, when you take those quotations in isolation, it seems that the author, Ellen White, was completely and totally against voting in political elections. When you read her carefully, she admonishes us to not get involved in the political process to the point where we are making a political party or a political candidate or candidates our savior, is what she's saying. But both Ellen White and the Adventist Church writ large have been convinced that there are times when it is not only appropriate, but necessary and required for the people of God to get involved politically through the process of voting. I'm going to share that evidence in a minute, and it is overwhelmingly clear. But first, let me explain this about the Adventist Church's stance on voting from our very inceptions, from our very beginning. From our inception as a church and a denomination in 1863, May to be exact, of that year. Now, we came into existence, I believe, officially May 1863, during the Civil War. And just 2 years after it was officially organized, the members of the General Conference met for its third General Conference session in 1865. At that time, at that General Conference session, the church made one of its first initial official statements on voting at that time. Here's what the church says. Resolved that in our judgment, the act of voting, when exercised in behalf of justice, check out these words, in behalf of justice, humanity, and right, is in itself blameless and may be at sometimes highly proper, but that the casting of any vote that shall strengthen the cause of such crimes as intemperance, insurrection, and slavery, we regard as highly criminal in the sight of heaven. But we would deprecate any participation in the spirit of party strife. So the church was saying in its very inception that there are times when we need to vote and there are issues that we need to raise our votes for or against. But we don't need to get involved in politics just for the sake of being involved in politics, is what the church is saying. Issues are the order of the day. And there are times, the church was saying, that God's people needs to raise its voice for or against particular issues that are affecting Americans. One of the issues that the church railed against in the 1800s was the issue of alcohol consumption. The Seventh-day Adventist Church in the 1800s and also in the 1900s was one of the leading churches and organizations that advocated against the sale and use of alcohol and tobacco. In 1882, the president of the General Conference at the time, his name was George I. Butler, he wrote a very balanced article for the Review, which is the church's official organ and paper. In it, he pointed out that some had gotten so involved in politics that they had forgotten the Lord and warned against such involvement. At the same time, he also encouraged voting in favor of prohibition, which is the vote against the use and the sale of alcohol. Here's what he said. We hope every Seventh-day Adventist voter in the state, so we're referring to the state of Iowa, will vote for this law, will vote to support prohibition, which the country did pass for a number of years, prohibiting the sale and the use of alcohol. And Butler continues, and induce, he says, I hope that every Seventh-day Adventist in the state of Iowa would induce or persuade all others to do so whom he can influence by honorable means. He said Seventh-day Adventists in the state of Iowa should vote for prohibition and against the use and the sale of alcohol. Moreover, he says, Seventh-day Adventists should use their influence to get other individuals to vote against the sale and the use of alcohol. In 1891, President Butler says this. We are living under let me start over. Were we living under an absolute monarchy, all we could do would be to pray. But in this republic, in this democratic republic, where we get the opportunity of raising our voices on issues, we have an instrument given with which we can second our prayers, and we do that by our ballots, by voting, in other words. Butler is an advocate for Adventists to register and vote against the sale and the use of alcohol in America. And speaking on the subject of intemperance and alcohol consumption, Ellen White, one of the leaders of the Adventist Church, says this. Intemperate men should not by vote of the people be placed in positions of trust. Intemperate men whose passions are all out of control, who cannot control their alcohol consumption or other passions, should not by vote be placed in positions of leadership and trust. Do you hear that? She says that people in general and Adventists in particular should exercise their right and vote to prevent men who consume alcoholic beverages in excess from being voted into public office. Why? Because there's an issue at stake. She's not talking about voting just for the sake of voting. She's not recommending that we join a political party for the sake of joining a political party. No, she was promoting the idea that we need to stand up for issues when that is needed. Now, this next quote from Ellen White is going to absolutely shock you. She says, "Shall we vote for prohibition?" she asked. "Yes, to a man everywhere," she replied. "And perhaps I shall shock some of you if I say, if necessary, vote on the Sabbath day for prohibition if you cannot vote at any other time." Oh my gosh, it doesn't get any clearer than that. She says, if you are working and you're working all day long, and by the time you are free to go to the polls are closed, and the only time you have the opportunity of going and registering your vote against the use and the sale of tobacco, if the only time you can do that is on Sabbath, which is the seventh day of the week, which we refer to as Saturday, if that is the only time you can go and register that vote, then by all means, go to the voting facility on Sabbath and vote. Because that's what Christians do. We vote for or against issues that would impact us directly as a people, as an American people generally, and as Seventh-day Adventist Christians in particular. Here's another quote. Check this out. "In our favored land, every voter has some voice in determining what laws shall control the nation. Should not that influence and that vote be cast on the side of temperance and virtue?" Temperance. Temperance is participating in something or consuming something that is good in moderation and eliminating that thing altogether when it is bad and harmful to the human body. Should not that influence and that vote be cast on the side of temperance and virtue? The advocates of temperance fail to do their whole duty unless they exert their influence by precept and example, by voice, by pen, and by vote in favor of prohibition and total abstinence of alcohol in any form. We need not expect that God will work a miracle to bring about this reform and thus remove the necessity for our exertion. We ourselves must grapple with this giant foe. And our motto is this: no compromise and no cessation of our efforts till the victory is gained. Check out that motto again. No compromise and no cessation of our efforts till the victory is gained. In other words, we are not going to stop advocating for the prohibition and the use and the sale of alcohol and tobacco until we have won this battle. In addition to that, she also addresses the pastors of her day, wondering why they weren't advocating, why they weren't using their platforms with their congregations and their members and the membership for the prohibition of alcohol. Here's what she says: "I will inquire why some of our ministerial brethren are so far behind in proclaiming the exalted theme of temperance. Why is it that greater interest is not shown in health reform?" So she calls the pastors of her day on the carpet for not joining that movement and raising their voices and their votes. So for Ellen White, prohibition was a spiritual matter, not just a physiological matter. She was convinced that if people were inebriated, they could not and would not adequately hear the voice of God. And she was convinced that if they could not hear the voice of God, then the salvation of mankind was at stake. Therefore, it was a fight the church had to fight, because we were placed on planet Earth to work on behalf of the mankind, of all mankind, for the salvation, that is, of all mankind. That's why we've been raised up as a church and as a people. In addition to the issue of alcohol consumption, in the 1880s, a very dangerous and nefarious bill was introduced in Congress to make Sunday the Sabbath by law in the United States of America. You heard me right. In the 1880s, a bill was introduced in Congress. And they were poised and prepared to vote and make Sunday the Sabbath by law. And this bill was actually introduced in Congress. And Ellen White, in response to that, counsels the church that the saints of God must come together and pray about this issue that threatens the land. Now, this next comment applies as much to us today as it did in her day. Here's what she says. Those who are making an effort to change the Constitution and secure a law enforcing Sunday observance little realize what will be the result. A crisis is just before us. Check out this next several quotes. It is our duty to do all in our power to avert the threatened danger. A vast responsibility is devolving upon men and women of prayer throughout the land to petition that God may sweep back this cloud of evil and give a few more years of grace to work for the Master. Here's another one. We are not doing the will of God if we sit in quietude, doing nothing to preserve liberty of conscience. Fervent, effectual prayer should be ascending to heaven that this calamity may be deferred until we can accomplish the work which has so long been neglected. Let there be most earnest prayer, and then let us work in harmony with our prayers. So she says, it's not enough just to pray. We need to go to work. And what she's referencing is we need to go to the polls. We need to vote this down. And that is exactly what happened when Jones and Wagner went before Congress and stated why that would be a dangerous mistake. So yes, there were times when Ellen White and the leaders of the Adventist Church encouraged the saints to pray, but they were clear that there were times when the saints needed to rise up and vote on certain important political issues. And not only did the leaders of the Adventist Church encourage the saints to vote, but God in his word often requires his people to take a stand against error and deception. So, what does the Bible say we should do when we encounter error and deception on a wide scale? I'm going to share with you Ephesians chapter 5, verse 11, which says, take no part in the worthless deeds of evil and darkness, and instead expose them. That's what God's people have been called to do. How do we do that? When possible, we can cast our votes to vote evil and darkness and deception. We vote it down. That's one way we can do it. And not only does the church endorse it, but Christ supports the practice. Here's what he says, Mark chapter 12, verse 17. Well then, Jesus said, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar and give to God what belongs to God. His reply completely amazed his critics. All right, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. Here's another quote, Romans 13:1. Everyone must submit to governing authorities, for all authority comes from God, and those in positions of authority have been placed there by God. So when you combine these two texts, the message is clear. That every 4 years, because we are a democratic republic and not a dictatorship, Americans have been invited by the government to go to the polls, to vote in our elected officials who will represent us in Congress and who will make decisions on behalf of American citizens and on behalf of the country. And clearly, our church believes that there are times and there are issues that the church cannot avoid. We believe that there are issues that we as a people of God cannot be silent on. We've demonstrated that in the past, and clearly, this is one of those times. Whether we should vote in an individual like Donald Trump who is such a flawed individual, is one of these times when God's people need to go to the polls and vote. Because this is not just a political issue. This is, in fact, a spiritual issue. This is also a prophetic issue. This is a candidate who have given 4 more years will take us down a road that the country will never recover from. This is the most important election of our lifetime because the stakes are as high as they have ever been. This is not just a political issue for this country and our church and our people. And I'm being intentionally redundant because I'm going somewhere. This is a spiritual issue as well. Permit me to explain. On his Truth Social site, Trump said this: do you throw the presidential election results of 2020 out and declare the rightful winner, referring to himself, or do you have a new election? A massive fraud of this type in magnitude allows for the termination of all rules, regulations, and articles, even those found in the Constitution. He's calling for a change or the dissolution of the Constitution. The very thing that guarantees our rights and freedoms, that makes us the envy of the entire world. He wants to change the Constitution and dissolve it and get rid of it because he has dictatorial and tyrannical aspirations. And if that weren't bad enough, I want you to listen to this veiled quote to end our democracy. Check out.
Out and vote just this time. You won't have to do it anymore. 4 more years, you know what? It'll be fixed. It'll be fine. You won't have to vote anymore, my beautiful Christians. I love you, Christians. I'm a Christian. I love you. Get out. You got to get out and vote. In 4 years, you don't have to vote again. We'll have it fixed so good you're not going to have to vote.
Did you hear that? Get out and vote this time, because if you put me in office, I'm going to make sweeping changes. I'm going to get rid of the obstacle that is the Constitution of the United States of America, which guarantees our rights and our freedoms with all of its amendments and with all of its articles. So how in the world can he end our constitutional right to vote? Is the question. Because he's planning on changing the Constitution and removing those constitutional rights and freedoms. And we will no longer be the free people that we've been for 248 years. Ladies and gentlemen, that has massive spiritual implications. Here's why. Revelation 13, which in my estimation is the single most important prophecy in all of Scripture, particularly as it relates to these last days. Revelation 13, 11 through 18 is talking about an entity in the last days. Revelation 13, 11 through 18 refers to it as a two-horned beast. That is a veiled way of referring to the United States of America, the most powerful entity on planet Earth in the last days. And if you know anything about prophecy, if you know anything about the book of Revelation, you should know that God could not put the words, even though he knew it was the United States of America that would rise up in the last days and fulfill this prophecy in verses 11 through 18. You should know that he could not use the words United States of America, because when that message was, when the prophecy was revealed to John and then John wrote it down, the book would never have survived. Because John was on a penal colony. It never would have gone out to the 7 churches in Asia Minor. And so Christ had to use veiled cryptic language, two-horned beast. But when you examine that prophecy carefully, it's only one entity that could refer to in these last days. That's the United States of America. And because truth is progressive, we're now viewing this prophecy in a brand new light through a brand new lens. The events of the last 8 or 9 years have shed new light on an old prophecy. We originally focused our thoughts on the United States government exclusively as a fulfillment of this text, as a fulfillment of that two-horned beast. But starting with the 2016 presidential campaign and the winner of that campaign being Donald Trump, and the things that 45 said, did, and attempted to do, because one man, through his lies and because of his insistence on retaining power once he lost the election in 2020 and refusing to leave office, and for the first time in all of our presidential elections, going all the way back to our very first president, George Washington, denying and refusing the peaceful transfer of power. And then, because of his ability to deceive millions of his MAGA sycophants and followers into thinking that he alone is the solution to America's ills and problems, we are now forced, because of all of that, to look at this prophecy through a fresh set of lenses and a fresh set of eyes. So here we go. Revelation 13, verse 11. And I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon. Ladies and gentlemen, this refers to none other, as I said, than the United States of America, the most powerful nation on planet Earth. There are some individuals, 30 years ago, who thought that this referred to Russia. Wrong answer. United States of America. It cannot refer to a communistic nation that is an atheistic nation that doesn't believe in God because of the spiritual implications that are found within this pericope. Prophecy is declaring that at some time and some point in the very near future, the United States of America, although it started out lamb-like, will transition to being a beast and a tyrant and dictatorial and tyrannical, and will change its constitution and begin to function like a dictatorship instead of the democratic republic that it had always been up to that transition. Let's look at verse 12 and following. And he exercised all the power of the first beast before him, and causeth the earth and them which dwell therein to worship. The key word here is worship. The first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. Let's jump down to verse 14. And he deceiveth them. There's that word deception, ladies and gentlemen, which a political party and a political candidate is truly guilty of. Deception, lies, deceit. He deceiveth them that dwell on the earth by the means of those miracles which he had power to do in the sight of the beast, saying to them that dwell on the earth that they should make an image to the beast which had the wound by a sword and did live. Verse 15. And he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast, that other political religious entity that it's going to join forces with, that would cause as many as would not worship that other political religious entity that it will partner with in these last days, that if Americans and people around the world don't worship that other entity, which is in itself an incredibly powerful religious / political entity, if individuals around the world don't worship that organization, that a decree would be made that they would be killed. Now, all of this seems absolutely incredible before Donald Trump showed up. But he's made it clear that the individuals and members of the press and members of the opposite party and individuals in his own party who are going to vote, who have voted for Joe Biden and now for Kamala Harris, that they are traitors and enemy combatants, and some of them, like one of his generals, should be killed. This is not just political, ladies and gentlemen. This is spiritual. We don't see it today on this scale, but that day is coming. Whether Donald Trump fulfills this prophecy or another right-wing conservative does. Because I'm convinced that that's who will bring about this fulfillment much more than a liberal. Consequently, to answer the question that I posed earlier, should we vote for Donald Trump? Based on scripture, as well as the incredibly flawed character of this dangerous man, the answer is an emphatic, absolutely, positively, categorically, without hesitation or equivocation, no. Absolutely not, under any circumstances. If you value freedom of all Americans, not just freedom for individuals in your particular party. If you value the freedom of all Americans, if you want the lifestyle of all Americans to continue if you want the Constitution to remain intact, if you want this country to be unified instead of being divided along racial lines, then you can't vote for that man under any circumstances, because he is a threat to our democracy and our way of life. Now, as I close, if you like this content, you know what to do. Subscribe to the channel so that you will not miss any of our upcoming weekly episodes. And again, I want to thank my producer extraordinaire, Lorraine Edwards, for an outstanding job behind the scenes. I could not and I would not want to do this without her. Thank you, Lorraine. And ladies and gentlemen, until next time, be blessed. I'll see you then.